I'm Rob McGaughey with Timbral Research, and I'm back here again at Sweetwater Studio A to compare some of the different impulse responses that we've shot as part of our Impulsive library with the actual hardware devices that from whence they came. So you can hear these things and compare them back and forth. So what I've got here are 6 examples of isolated instruments. I've got a vocal and an acoustic guitar, a snare, a conga, a shaker, and an electric guitar. It's a slide style guitar. And what I'll do is I'll play them for you. First, 100% wet with the hardware, and then 100% wet with the impulse. And then I'll solo back and forth. I'm in the solo XOR mode in Pro Tools, where you can listen back and forth and compare them as it goes back and forth. And if you'll watch the screen, you can see on the track, it says HW100. That's the physical hardware box that's recorded, through. Impulse IR100, which is the impulse response, 100% wet, both of them 100% wet. And then also the hardware and the impulse in the context of a mix. So they're fairly wet mixes, but it's a little bit more of a real world thing. So you can say, okay, here's what it sounds like when it's completely isolated in a way I'd probably never use it. And then here's more of a normal real world scenario. Again, probably leaning towards a little bit wet, but you can hear them in both circumstances. So I'll go through the 6 different examples. I'll play them for you. Again, watch the solo button, follow the little bouncing solo button, and you can see, you'll know what you're listening to. And then you can make decisions for yourself about how the product sounds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a conga track. This is just an isolated conga track. And again, I'm going to start with the hardware soloed up, 100% wet, and I'll switch back and forth between the two. So when you see the solo button switch, you'll know whether it's the impulse or the hardware. So let's go ahead and take a listen. Okay, now let's listen to it in context. Start with the hardware. Okay, you get the idea. We've done a really good job of mimic the sound of different presets. So that particular preset that you just listened to was based on our Euro Modern, and it was a preset called Nice for Percussion that is really aimed at this type of thing. It's kind of a plate kind of a sound, and anyway, that's that. Let's take a listen at another one. Let's just take a snare, an individual snare drum. It's a mic'd up snare, so you can hear some bleed from some other stuff in there as well. But you hear the snare, and we'll just add a snare plate. This is also on the Euro Modern preset list, and it's just a snare plate. So we'll switch over to our snare, and again, we'll start with the hardware 100% wet, and then we'll compare the two back and forth. Okay, now let's listen to it in context. Start with the hardware. Okay, you hear that little imaging difference. When you put it in context, you really can't hear it all. It's very difficult to hear that. That's what you hear when it's 100% wet. in a way you would actually use it, it becomes very difficult to determine the difference between the two. So now let's take a listen to another preset. This one is a shaker, just a regular percussion shaker. And we'll use a preset from our American 90 percussion room is kind of what this is. So we'll do the same thing. We'll go through and listen to it, starting with the hardware 100% wet. Okay, now let's listen to it in context. Start with the hardware. Okay, again, very difficult to hear the difference between the two. So now, let's take a listen to an electric guitar. This is a slide style guitar. I'm going to use another preset from the American 90 category. And it's more of a room. And we'll do is we'll start again with the hardware. And go to guitar. Here we go. Okay, there you hear the two presets, but again, there's a little bit of an imaging difference between the two. So now let's listen to them in context. So in a mix, we'll start with the hardware. Okay, so now let's listen to a vocal. I've got a vocal track here, and we'll do the same thing. This is from our American 480 collection, and it's a vocal. We'll start, it's a large hall, and we'll start 100% wet with the hardware. Okay, so now you hear we've captured that really, really well, even 100% wet. So now let's listen to it in context. Same part, we'll start with the hardware.
What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. And what a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer.
Okay, you see, this is a really, I think, a very well-known preset from a very expensive, kind of maybe one of the more legendary hardware devices in the history of reverberators. And I think we've done an excellent job of capturing the essence of that preset, where you could use this in addition to the hardware, or if you don't have the budget for the hardware, so you can, or just if you need, you need more instances. That's what Impulsive is great at. So let's take one more example here. We'll listen to an acoustic guitar. This is tracked up, so again, you're going to hear a little bit of headphone bleed. They're just tracks we've just pulled out of a real session, and we'll use them, use them for this purpose. So it's a very real world example of a way you might use reverbs in the real world. So again, we'll start with the hardware, 100% wet. Okay, now let's listen to the same guitar part in context. Start with the hardware again. Again, you hear in context the very, very close, very difficult to hear the difference between those two, the real hardware and Impulsive. So hopefully this was helpful for you to understand Impulsive, to hear it compared back against actual hardware reverbs. All of these were just printed audio tracks, whether it came out of the hardware or out of Impulsive. These were done in Pro Tools with TL Space, using Impulsive with the Pro Tools mod delay and EQs for modulation and filters if needed to match the two. And it was just a low pass filter was all that was ever used, which is the one piece that you need sometimes to perfectly match to a hardware preset. And you could compare the two, and if you like what you hear, then you want the sound of a hardware reverb, high-end hardware reverbs in your mix, then this might be a great alternative for you. If you have any questions or you'd like to know more about it, give Sweetwater a call. Their people are well trained by myself, and I'm sure they'll be able to answer any questions, or if they don't know the answer, I'm sure they can find out for you. Thank you very much.